Alright, we are back with a new video, and with the finale to Survivor 43 right around the corner, it is time to do the jury scenarios for this season. If you're new to this, what I like to do right before the finale to Survivor is to rank each of the final 3 combinations based on how likely I think they are to happen, and from there try to forecast how I think the jury votes will play out in each of those scenarios. Now, at the time of recording this, there are 5 players left in the game, those being Cassidy, Gabler, Jesse, Carla, and Owen. And with this season being a final 3, that gives us 10 possible final 3 scenarios to break down here. And like I said, I'm going to be ranking these scenarios based on how likely I think they are to happen, based on what I think is going to happen within the game. So let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 10, the final 3 scenario I think is the least likely to happen is Cassidy versus Jesse versus Carla. And there are 2 reasons why I think this one is pretty unlikely to happen. One, it has both Cassidy and Carla in it, and considering that the feud between Cassidy and Carla has been bubbling over in the edit for the last couple of episodes, I find it very unlikely that these 2 are going to allow each other to get to the end. And with Carla no longer having an idol, I think that even if Cassidy were to win immunity, I think Carla just gets taken out of the game at that point. So I feel like either Cassidy or Carla are likely to be booted at the final 5, making this particular scenario particularly unlikely. But even going beyond that, this scenario lacks Gabler or Owen in it, and considering I think Owen at least is guaranteed to get to the end based on the edit, I find this scenario even less likely to happen. But if this scenario were to happen, I think this would lead to a pretty clear Jesse win. I think Jesse in general is the biggest jury threat on the board. I think he wins against everyone left in the game at this point. Now, to be fair, I think Carla could get some votes. I think she probably gets Janine's vote. I could also see her getting James and Sammy's votes, as it does seem like Carla had a pretty good relationship with those 2 at least. But really, I think Jesse played the best game, and I think the jury will be the most impressed by Jesse's game at the end of it if this scenario were to happen. But again, considering what would need to happen for us to get this final 3, both from a gameplay perspective and from a edit perspective, I just find it very unlikely. So because of that, I have it here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have another pretty unlikely scenario here. But here we have Cassidy versus Gabler versus Carla. And again, this scenario also has the same issue with the number 10 one, in that it has both Cassidy and Carla in it. And in order for this scenario to happen, it would basically involve Cassidy and Carla having to come together, which I think is, again, pretty unlikely at this point. And then Jesse would probably be cut at 4 through firemaking, which I do think is a bit more likely to happen than the number 10 spot, but still a pretty unlikely situation to happen. Now, if we were to get this final 3, I think Carla wins, although there are plenty of votes up for grabs there. I think James could be a pretty integral swing vote between Cassidy and Carla, as he was obviously aligned with both of them. And while I think he would recognize that Carla is more likely to get jury votes, I could also see him being pretty upset with Carla, given the nature of how he was voted out by her at the split tribal. I think Cody could also be a swing vote, where realistically, I think he leans more towards Carla, though I could see him voting for Gabler in certain situations. And I think Ryan would probably be a Gabler vote in this situation, but really, I think Carla would get most of the votes. I think Carla naturally would get the most respect from this jury in this final 3 scenario. But again, considering I think Carla isn't going to win based on her edit, and considering that this scenario would have both Cassidy and Carla in it, I don't think it's very likely to happen. So because of that, I have it here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have the other scenario that has both Cassidy and Carla in it. But here we have Cassidy versus Carla versus Owen. And the main reason I have this one above the others is that it does have Owen in it, and considering I think Owen is a pretty likely contender to make it to final tribal, I did give it the edge because of that, but even then, the fact that it has both Cassidy and Carla in it makes it pretty unlikely. Now, if the scenario were to happen, I do think Carla would win, though it would actually be a bit closer between Carla and Owen, where I do think Owen could get some votes here. I think he could probably get Noel's vote. I could also see him getting Gabler's vote. And I could also see Jane's being up in the air between Cassidy and Carla, to where if Jane's votes for Cassidy, that would obviously give Owen more of a chance. But even then, I still think the rest of the votes would go to Carla in this situation, and through that, I think Carla would win. But again, given the things that would need to happen for it to be here, I did have it this low at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and these next two scenarios are also pretty similar in that they have two people in it that I don't think are likely to get to the end together. But again, compared to Cassidy and Carla, I do think there is more of a shot. But at number 7, we do have Cassidy versus Gabler versus Jesse. And I don't think Cassidy and Jesse are getting to the end together. I feel like Cassidy's edit doesn't really feel in line with that of a losing finalist. And to be clear, I think Cassidy would lose to Jesse in a jury vote for sure. So with that in mind, I don't think Cassidy would get to the end with Jesse. Now, again, the path forward would be a bit more clear than the Cassidy and Carla situations, where in this situation, Jesse would obviously vote out Carla at 5, which could happen, to be fair. Although I could also see Jesse taking Carla to 4 over Cassidy, as we've obviously seen Cassidy do better in challenges. So through that, I think Jesse would probably take the shot at Cassidy over Carla if given the opportunity, though obviously if Cassidy were to win Final 5 immunity, then he would essentially be forced to cut Carla in that spot. And then a Final 4, again, he would probably need to win Fire in order for that to happen, probably being Owen in that situation. And through that, we would get this scenario. And I do feel like Jesse would win this with him getting the votes of James, Noel, Sammy, Cody, and Owen. Now, I do think Cassidy could get some votes. I could see her getting Janine's vote. I could also see her getting Carla's vote in this situation. And I do think Ryan could vote for Gabler in this spot, though we could also recognize that Jesse is the better player. And to be fair, we've never seen Ryan say anything bad about Jesse. But either way, I still think Jesse would win in this situation. But honestly, compared to some of the other scenarios we'll be getting into soon, I don't think it's as likely. So because of that, it is here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have a very similar scenario, but we're just subbing out one person. But here we have Cassidy versus Jesse versus Owen. And I do think this is a bit more likely simply because Owen is there instead of Gabler. And I could actually see a world where this scenario happens. Either Gabler gets cut at 5, like maybe if Cassidy were to win Final 5 immunity, Jesse could consider taking out Carla, but then see that Gabler would be more likely to beat him at Fire, and in turn take out Gabler in that spot. Or in a more funny scenario, maybe Gabler wins Final 4 immunity, and then he decides to take the shot at Jesse by giving up immunity, taking on Jesse in Fire, and losing. Personally, I think that would be hilarious, but I don't think it's particularly likely. But again, I do think that Jesse would win in this scenario, where I do think Jesse would get every vote except Janine and Carla's. Those I think could go to Cassidy. And Gabler could be up in the air. I could see Gabler voting for Owen. Although even then, I think Gabler recognizes that Jesse is the better player. And through that, even Gabler could vote for Jesse in that spot. So through that, I do think Jesse would clearly win in this situation. But again, on the whole, I don't think Cassidy and Jesse are getting to the end together based on their edits. So because of that, I do have them here at number 6. Now I'm moving on to number 5. And this is a pretty interesting scenario, all things considered. But here we have Gabler versus Carla versus Owen. And honestly, the main reason I had this one as high is because it has both Gabler and Owen in it. And that alone boosts it to a degree. But the main reason I don't think this one is super likely is I do think Carla would win it with her getting most of the votes here. Now, to be fair, I think Gabler could get some votes here. I think James is up in the air. I think Cody is also up in the air. And I do think Ryan would also get Gabler's vote as well. I could also see Noel potentially voting for Owen to a degree. But I do think Carla would win in this scenario, all things considered. But again, considering I think Carla is unlikely to win, I don't think it's super likely. Although, if we're looking at the path forward, I think there is a way for Carla to get to the end here. I mean, again, Cassidy would have to be cut at 5, which I do think Jesse could be open to doing, assuming things go his way. And then in Final 4, Jesse loses fire making. So I think the path is there from a gameplay perspective. And one other wrinkle I should add is this could be a situation where Gabler could win. Now, again, my forecasting here is based off what I know and how I feel the votes will shake out. But if Gabler is the one to take out Jesse here, if he's the one to beat Jesse in Fire, and if he's able to present that accordingly and bring up some of the flaws with Carla's game, then maybe the votes could sway in Gabler's favor. So I think that's another interesting element to this scenario here. But again, I don't think it's the most likely in the world. So because of that, I have it here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this is another pretty interesting scenario, but here we have Gabler versus Jesse versus Carla. Now, I did consider putting this one lower because it doesn't have Owen in it instead of putting in Gabler, but really, I could see this happening as well. Again, it's a very similar path with Cassidy getting cut at 5, but in this scenario, Jesse is the one to pull out in the fire making challenge, and in turn, he's able to get to the end with Carla. And again, I think Jesse would beat Carla in a jury vote, and he obviously beats Gabler as well. So Jesse would win in this situation, getting most of the votes. Now again, Carla would get some votes here. I think she would get Janine's vote. Sammy could be up in the air, though. Again, I think he leans towards Jesse. I think he recognizes that Jesse played the better game. And I think on the whole, it would be pretty decisive in Jesse's favor. But again, we'll have to see what happens in that regard. So because of that, I do have it here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and this is a very similar scenario, but just subbing out one person. But here we have Jesse versus Carla versus Owen. Again, just swapping out Gabler with Owen. And I do think this is another somewhat likely scenario, with obviously Gabler getting cut before the end, and Owen being more likely to get to Final Tribal, being in that spot. And again, I do feel like this one would involve Jesse winning the fire making challenge at 4, but in turn, he would win the game in the scenario, getting most of the votes there. Again, I think Carla would still get Janine's vote. She could get Sammy's vote here. And then there's Gabler, who I did say was up in the air between Jesse and Owen, but it doesn't really matter whether he votes for Owen or Jesse. Jesse would still win. And I do think this scenario could happen in some situations. But again, I feel like the top 2 are more likely to happen for me, so because of that, I have it here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and honestly, these are the pretty clear top 2. I feel very confident that these 2 scenarios are very likely to happen, though again, based on how crazy the season has been from an editing perspective, I could see them not being the case. But again, going into the finale, based on how I feel these players are going to do, based on what I think is going to happen within the game, I think these are the most likely scenarios to happen. But at number 2, we have Cassidy versus Gabler versus Owen. Now again, I had Cassidy at number 2 on my power ranking. I said that it's very likely that she's either going to go out in 5th or she's going to win the game based on our edit. I don't really see her going out in fire. I don't really see her being a losing finalist. I feel like if she was going to win the game, this would be the most likely scenario for it to happen. And again, Gabler and Owen are there. I feel like those 2 are pretty likely to get to Final Tribal. And the path there is pretty straightforward, where Jesse cuts Carla at 5, and then Jesse loses the fire making at 4, giving us a scenario. And I think Cassidy would win in this scenario, getting the votes of Janine, James, Sammy, and Carla. That's already enough to win. Now, I do think some votes could be up in the air. I think Cody and Jesse would be pretty interesting swing votes here, as I could see them voting for Cassidy, but I could also see them voting for Gabler in certain cases. And I could also see Ryan voting for Gabler as well, Noel voting for Owen. So I think the vote here would be a bit all over the place. And as I talked about earlier, I also think this could be one of Gabler's better case scenarios as well, where I think it's a bit harder to gauge what Cassidy's true jury chances are. And I could see Gabler stealing some more votes here than I'm giving him credit for. So again, this could be all over the place. I could see Gabler doing pretty well in this scenario, to be honest. But again, if we are assuming Cassidy is the winner, I think this would be the most likely scenario for her to be in, as I think this is the most clear scenario for her to actually win the game. But again, I feel like compared to the number 1 option, I don't have as much confidence in this one happening. So because of that, I have it here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the final 3 scenario I believe is the most likely to happen is Gabler versus Jesse versus Owen. Now, you could debate whether this is truly the optimal path for Jesse to be taking in terms of getting to the end, as by leaving Gabler in the game coming into the Final 4, Gabler is someone who has talked about making a big move, and through that, Jesse could be in some danger if he allows Gabler to get to the Final 4. But if we are looking at the way the game is playing out, I think Jesse is probably going to cut Cassidy or Carla at 5, more than likely Cassidy. And then at Final 4, Jesse would probably go into fire, and in that case, he would win the fire making challenge against either Carla or Cassidy. And through that, we would get this Final 3 scenario. And I do think Jesse would win here, as he would get the most of the votes. Now, I do think there would be a couple votes up for the grabs. I think Janine could be interesting here, where I could see a world where she votes for Owen in this case, though realistically, I think she would lean Jesse here. And even Ryan, who I do think would be a Gabler vote in most cases, I think even in that case, he would recognize that Jesse would be the clear favorite and could vote for Gabler in this case, though. Again, I'll give Gabler the vote here in this case. But again, I feel like based on what we've been seeing so far, I think Jesse is setting himself up to cut either Cassidy or Carla at 5, and then hopefully win the Fire Making Challenge at 4 to secure this final 3 and win the game as a result. I feel like if Jesse were to actually win the game, this would be the path that he would take in order to get there. Now, yes, there is a slight chance that Jesse could recognize that Gabler is onto him and maybe cut Gabler at 5 and allow Cassidy and Carla to get the 4. But more than likely, I think this is the path that he takes. I think he sees Cassidy and Carla as bigger threats to him winning the game. So because of that, I do have this scenario here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, after the season ends, I plan to do a review and a player ranking for Survivor 43, so stay tuned for that. Now that Amazing Race 34 is wrapped up, I plan to do a team ranking for that as well, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.